So hopefully after I finish with you tonight, I'll put you out with some tips, tricks, some techniques that I use to catch kingfish. Some of these things can flow out to other species, and you might have your own techniques which you can develop yourself. And that's the one thing I'll tell you straight away, there's no wrong way. If it works for you, it's a good technique. Okay, I do things differently to other people. I've got mates that fish differently. But if you're putting fish on the boat, it's a successful technique. Okay, so my name's Adam Clancey, and a little bit about me. I've been fishing since I was 3. I've fished all over the world, a lot through the South Pacific. The largest freshwater fish I've caught was 8.5 feet long, weighed about 440 pounds. The largest saltwater fish I've caught weighed just under 800 pounds. And the largest shark that I didn't catch was about 1,000 pounds. We let it go beside the boat. One of my favourite species is kingfish. Okay, so I do the Fishy Business TV show. But more than that, I've been, for the last 25 years, a sponsored angler. And to do that, you've got to perform. You've got to put fish on photos, on TV, on books. So you learn very quickly to get out there and do things right. And the lucky thing is, I wouldn't say I'm the best fisherman in the world, but I've been lucky enough to fish with some of the best fishermen in the world. And I've stolen all their great ideas and sort of put them into my tackle box. And now I'm going to try and share some with you. Now, before we go any further, who's here just to catch their first kingfish? You all caught one? No? Yeah. Who's here to catch their first kingfish over 10 kilos, or legal kingfish? It's good, be honest, it's all good. There's no shame in here. Who's here to try and catch a 20 kilo plus kingfish? Yeah, that's getting better. Who's here to catch a 30 kilo kingfish? Yeah. And who's interested in catching a 40 plus kilo kingfish? Right. So we've got a range of anglers here. So I'm going to try and tailor my talk to meet everyone's needs, okay? My largest kingfish is 44 kilos, and I caught that off the rocks, okay? The largest one I've lost is 45 kilos. Now, you're asking a question. I'll answer your question right away. So I was fishing at the Great Barrier, and this kingfish came in and ate a massive kahawai. Hooked it up, busted it off about a minute later. Half an hour later, my mate gets another strike on my rod, picks it up, very same rod that I lost the fish on, hooks it, lands it, it's got my hook in its gob, 45 kilos. So fishing is a great thing. So where to fish for kingfish? So that's one of the great things about kingies, because they show up in all sorts of different places. I've got a mate down the back there, Mark Armistad, who I fish with a bit when I come down here. He's a bit of a local legend. And what we were just talking about, last 5 times I've been down here fishing with Mark, we've had kingies on the boat every time. We haven't gone past the channel marker, the furthest channel marker at the entrance to the harbour. So you don't have to travel for miles to catch good kingies. In saying that, kingies have a sort of a habitat that they like. So at the moment around here, you'll probably find most of the kingies are hanging over the deeper water reefs. They're just sort of in that transitional stage before they come into the harbours and estuaries chasing the smaller bait fish. They'll be out there chasing things like flying fish, squid, even cuttlefish, nautilus occasionally. When the nautilus are run, they go crazy on those, and soweries. So you have to affect your techniques depending on where you're fishing. But there's 3 key things that kingfish like. Number one, like all of us, they like food. So if you've got an area where there's lots of kingfish food, that's a good place to look. They like the right kind of water. And the right kind of water for kingfish is anything above sort of 14 degrees, right? Nice and clear, plenty of oxygen, and a bit of wash, a bit of current, okay? The third thing kingfish absolutely adore is structure. Whether it's a channel marker, an underwater reef, something floating on the surface, a bridge. And if you think about it, where do all the kingies get caught? Off the wharf, by the channel marker, Tahua Reef. So they love structure. So that's where you look for kingfish. At certain times of year, in summer they come inshore. In spring they're usually offshore, right? But they can turn up at any time. As I said, bait fish. You got to eat. So that's the key. So let's deal with the first technique of kingy fishing, which is live baiting. This is, without doubt, the best technique to easily catch kingfish. If you put it in the right way, live baiting, you will catch fish. Now there are all sorts of rods and reels that you could use for live baiting. This is the sort of rig that I'll be using this summer for my heavy live baiting work. So this reel has 500 plus meters of 50-pound braid. The rod's suitable for 50-pound line, and I'll rig that up and use it for a variety of live baiting situations. Okay, but not everyone has that sort of gear. So let's scale it down a little bit. Here we have a basic bait runner type reel, so no kuma, right, on a rod that can fish up to probably 15 kilo line. A bait runner reel is good because it gives you the advantage that you can free spool your bait when you're live baiting. So you can let it run. And then when you wind the handle, it goes into gear and your drag is preset. Now, you will catch good kingies on gear like this. I've caught kingies 30 pound plus, 20 kilos on gear like this. In certain situations, you'll be outgunned. If you're general fishing and you want something you can put a live bait out with a chance of catching a kingy, this puts you in the game. Now I've got mono on this one, but to improve your chances, I'd probably go 30-pound braid, because braid, in my mind, stands the resistance against rubbing against rocks and things like that. But what I'm trying to tell you is, if you want to do it, if you haven't got the good gear, just get the best of what you've got to make the gear work, okay? So a bait runner rig will put you in the hunt for kingies. The advantage of this is you can stray line for snapper with it, you can cast a popper with it, you can cast a metal lure with it, you can do all sorts of things with it. So it's general purpose gear. This, we're talking more specialized gear. They're both perfectly suitable for the job. No matter what rod and reel you use, setting it up properly is the key. And by that, I've already talked about balancing the line weight with the rod action, okay? But all reels have a drag on it. Some have lever drag, some have the knob in the middle, but they all have a drag. And you need to set that drag properly. This will put you in the game a lot more. Now, you don't just go out there and twist the knob and go, yeah, that's about right. Okay, because I guarantee 90% of the time you're wrong. So a drag setting, before braid came around, we always used to use a rule of thumb of 1/3 the breaking strain of your line for your drag setting through the rod. So if you're using 30-pound line, you'd use about a 10-pound drag setting. With braid, you've got a bit more flexibility, because braid, although they call it 50-pound, it generally breaks a lot higher. But what I would do is set my drag to the optimum working curve of the rod, which means when I pull line off the reel, I'll get James to give me a little help here. Just grab that, James. This rod will deflect, which means bend, right? And that's a bit under, right? So I'll tighten the drag up a little bit. And that's a bit over. It's too heavy because I'm going to break the line. Dial it back a bit. And that's still a little touch heavy for me, and it's flattening the rod out, so I'll go one back. Right. Now, see how that rod's nicely deflected? I'm putting lots of pressure on. If I snap the line, I'm going to fall over backwards. I've got myself braced. But that's what you're looking for. So it doesn't matter if you're using specialist gear or general purpose gear. If you go out, put the right line on the rod and set the drag, it puts you in the hunt. One of the biggest mistakes I see made, someone will hook a kingfish and buck fever takes over and they clap their thumbs on the reel. Right? There are times when you need to do that, there are times when you don't. So that's where angling comes into it. But as a rule of thumb, if you set your drag properly, don't do anything to increase the drag unless it's make or break time. Okay? With certain sorts of tackle, you need to be very aggressive when you first hook the fish, but we're talking about live baiting. And when you're live baiting, when you're fishing deep live baits, you need to get the fish up the first 20 meters or so he doesn't get back down to the reef. When you're surface live baiting, you just need to get the fish swimming in the right direction, and they usually follow you if you do it right. So setting the drag properly, having the right line weight for your rod and reel, essential. So I've covered a little bit, mono versus braid. For 90% of my kingy fishing these days, I'm fishing braid. It has no stretch. I feel it's more abrasion resistant to reefs, rocks, and bust-off situations, okay? And it hooks up more positively. So if you're fishing deep, when you strike with braid, if you move the line an inch, 2 inches, a foot, it moves that far underwater. With monofilament, depending on the brand that you have, it has stretch between 10 and 15%. So if you're fishing in 100 meters of water and you strike at the surface, you're basically just pulling stretch out of the line, so it makes it hard to set the hook. When it comes to leader is the next critical choice. So I've set up what I do here, and this is a good little tip that you might want to take home with you. I pre-make my leaders. And what I've got here is a 100-pound tough trace, 8x0 circle hook, right? And I vacuum seal them. Why do I do that? Lisa already asked me that question. A couple of reasons. Firstly, when I put it in my tackle box, it doesn't get tangled up. And when you want it, you can just pull it out, open it up, and away you go. Secondly, if it gets salty and wet, it doesn't rust the hook. So what you've got is a leader in perfect condition, ready to go. And I'll tell you about the construction of a leader. So this is my standard sort of live baiting leader. Depending on the size of the live bait is how big a hook I use. So, and you might be quite surprised. I'm happy to go down to a hook that size. Kingies. Biggest I use is probably next size up from that, about 10x0. But the gauge of the hook is the key. The thickness of the wire. You can get a hook like this that's nowhere near the thickness of this gauge, and it'll bend easily if you put it on a heavy rod. So you have to think about the hook thickness and strength when you're rigging your leaders. When I'm surface live baiting, which is what I do most of the time, I use a 10-foot leader. Don't ask me why, it's just what I like to use. But how I set them up is I actually crimp them with alloy crimps, and this has what they call an armour sleeve on it. What the armour sleeve does is when you put it on your swivel, and you have a snap swivel rigged up there, that protects it from the seesawing action of a long fight. So it stops it getting damaged. At the hook end, I sometimes crimp. Smaller hooks I'll tie. Bigger hooks I tend to crimp. Okay. And I'm using straight circle hooks, not offset circle hooks. The reason for that is if you're fishing for records, straight circle hooks are fully allowable under IGFA situations. Right. So that's my standard live bait rig. Right. Now balloons. I put a balloon on this just to show you. I very rarely use balloons. but you can, no problem with it. If you want to put a bait out the back and stop it from sinking into the weeds, put a balloon on it and it'll swim around. Some people tie it on with cotton or something like that. If you get the right size swivel, you can actually just pull the eye through the balloon through the eye and it will stay on. Or the best thing is a really light rubber band. Because why I don't like cotton is when the fish swims round and round, the balloon gets all twisted up, you end up twisting your leader, and then you get a big mess up, and that's when you get the strike and your line's all twisted up and it ends up breaking. So if you're going to tie it on, use a rubber band, very light one, and it will break off when you get a strike. When it comes to hardware, anything you use, make it heavy duty. Doesn't have to be huge size, but make it heavy duty, durable. Don't go buy cheap brass barrel swivels and go, she'll be right, because they're the ones that can let you down. And like this is a, you'll catch marlin and tuna and everything on the swivel. It's a big heavy duty swivel. It's probably oversized. You could go smaller, but it's perfectly fine. If you went to the normal brass barrel clip swivel, I guarantee I could pretty much pull that out with my hands. So if you hook a king, it's going to bend it out if you're running 50-pound line with a decent set drag. So we're talking live baiting. And rather than me being a good kingy fisherman, I'll tell you what I am. So I'm good at catching live bait. And a good kingy fisherman is always a good live bait catcher. So there are a number of ways that you can catch live baits, depending on what it is. If you're looking for piper, which is a very, very good kingfish live bait, tiny trout hook, like size 12, 16, little piece of bait, burley, tons of them in the harbour here. Go and catch them, keep them alive. Mackerel, yellowtail, kohuru mackerel, small kahawai, even yellow mullet. Sabikis are deadly, the little Japanese flies. Again, burley, bring them around, jiggle them up, easy. Then you get to the bigger live baits, which if you want to catch those guys wanting a 30 kilo kingy, you want a big live bait. And by big, I mean a 2 to 3 kilo kahawai. So you cannot use too big a bait. A lot of guys, when they fish up the 3 kings or down the Ranfurly, use whole skipjack tuna or big 3-4 kilo trevally. They just get scoffed, no problem. And that's how you get those 20, 30 kilo fish. But to catch kahawai, I've got a couple of techniques. If they're schooling up on the surface, your simple little jig, cast into them, will do it every time. My actual favourite technique, I didn't bring one tonight, I was a bit remiss, is I use a paravane, which is on a cord. It's a diving board, they'll have some here. And I put a small kahawai spinner, or the white spinner that it comes with. And I troll those behind the boat around the school of kahawai, catch your bait fast. There are some fish that are a bit hard to catch on rod and reel, like mullet, which is actually one of the best West Coast kingfish live baits you can get. So those grey mullet, those sea mullet, if you can get some of those, take them out Raglan, Carfair, I use them on the Manukau, Kaipara. They are the #1 West Coast live bait. They work on the East Coast as well, but on the West Coast they're sensational. Okay, and there's pretty much 2 ways you can get them. You catch them in a net, or you run a string of maybe 3 treble hooks on a line, put a little sinker on the bottom, cast over them when you see them, jag them. It is dangerous fishing, because if you don't jag and the hooks come flying past you, you end up with pierced ears and all sorts of things going on. So you have to be careful. But grey mullet, very good bait. The other one, I'll just go reflect back. That is, at this time of year, one of the top baits. Squid. Okay, and if you get a good day and you can get out to Mere or get around those areas, there's plenty of squid over there, as people probably know. And they will work live or dead. My preference is to troll them slowly. And we'll get onto that a little bit more. Once you caught your live bait, you've got to keep it alive. And just having a bucket in the boat will not work. Because if you've ever tried it, they last about half an hour and they die. So on your boat, you need a live bait tank, which needs to be fairly high volume, and it has to have a high volume pump, pumping, recirculating good water through it. And that will make your days fishing with live bait a lot easier. Because if you've just got a chili bin and you've got a bucket water, you're bucketing all day and it just gets frustrating. Your live bait tank, you just put them in there, leave them, forget about them, just pull them out when you need them. The other thing with the live bait tank is you need to get yourself a little mini net. because I've spent hours trying to grab them out of the bin, and they can swim so fast in this little bin. You've got a little net, they're easy to get out, and you don't stress them. So make sure you can keep your live baits alive. So we're building a bit of a pattern here: preparation, organisation, getting prepared for a trip. People say, marine electronics, what does a kingfish look like? Well, there's about 10 of them. Okay, big arches. I'm in 12 metres of water. I won't tell you the exact spot, but as you can see by my tracks on the GPS, I'm working over a particular area of reef because I know kingfish live there. So a good sounder, again, puts you in the hunt. Now, up to 50 metres, most sounders are good with the standard transducer. Beyond 50 metres, you need to start looking at a bigger kilowatt transducer to get decent readings at depth. Okay, so this transducer, I'm in 12 metres, any transducer will work. But if I was in 100 metres, I'd want a 1 kilowatt transducer so I could get pictures like this and know that there's fish down there. Weaker ones might not get the signal there, and you probably get blurs rather than nice defined arches, which is what you look for big fish. There's another one. There's actually a live bait in front of those, and they're coming to attack it. There's a school of kingfish. And those fish, probably 15, 16 kilo fish. And if you look there, the little vertical, this is the other thing with your fish finder. It's what they call the A scope here. See how that's a separate part to that reading? This is all historic. You've passed that already. This is now. So the A scope is one of the most important things when you're looking for fish. So as you can see, there's fish there, a little bit of sign at the top. All that blue at the top is noise, disregard it. Arches, red, good. A scope, straight under the boat right now. Does that make sense? The other thing, the track on my GPS. When I'm drifting or trolling, I've got my track running the whole time. Because as soon as I get a hit, I hit my mark, waypoint, and then I can go back, and I can take those same drift lines again and again and again, as for that shot before. So I'm using my electronics to put me in a concentrated area where the fish are, and I'm putting my bait over those fish again and again and again till they bite. Okay, so with your live baits, hook placement is another thing that you know is very, very important. If you just go and whack the hook through the middle of the fish, chances are kingy will come and crack it, and then the hook will reverse back into the fish and you'll get your bait back scaled. So make sure that the hook is proud of the fish. So you can see that I've got a kahawai. It's actually on a recurve circle hook. It's on a Black Magic harp hooker hook, and that's about 1 kilo kahawai. So you can see where I've hooked it in front of the dorsal, right? The hook's well proud, but it's also a recurve hook, so it's got a bend up. So when the hook is laying back, the eye of the hook is laying backwards towards the tail of the fish, the point is pointing upwards. Okay, if I hooked it the other way, the point would be pointing downwards, and if I've got a bite, it would turn back in on the bait. So that's why you have to be very careful there. The second hook there is through a jack mackerel, through the nostrils, and that's a Black Magic GZ hook at White Island. You can see Pursuit in the background. I've fished with Rick many times, and that's a good way when you're using smaller hooks with smaller live baits. It's a bit hard to see, but that's actually a bridle rig live bait using rubber bands. And that's my favourite technique with Koharu and Kahawai, the bigger ones. And then we've got a Tauranga Harbour piper hooked up through the bill. Because when kingies come and eat a pipe of that, they just gobble it. There's no mucking around. So hook placement, think about it. Make sure your hooks are sharp, strong. We've covered that. And again, that puts you in the hunt. Leader weight, again, is another thing to consider when you're making your rigs. So I'd say the minimum I use for kingfish is 60 pound. The maximum I use, I have gone up to 200, but normally 130, 140 will see you right most of the time. My average is 80 to 100, okay? I use either Black Magic Tough Trace or Black Magic Fluorocarbon. Now, what are the differences? So Tough Trace is just monofilament. It's just good line, it does the job, okay? Fluorocarbon line, whatever brand you do, is, people say, oh, is it tougher, is it whatever? Is it not better? Probably. There's comparisons that could be, say, both ways. But what fluorocarbon does, it has the same refractive index as water. What does that mean? You know, if you get a glass of water and you put something in it, it looks bent, okay? That means it's refracting the water and it's not the same refractive index. If you put some fluorocarbon in water, it'll be straight. What does that do for you? It makes it less visible in the water. So if I'm dealing with finicky fish, I'll go to 60, 80 pound fluorocarbon leader because it's less visible. And that does make a difference. Even scaling down mono leader, because I've had days when there's kingies swimming all around the boat, but you get them to bite, they're just looking at you laughing. But then if you scale down your leader, put it in front of them, you can get that bite. Smaller hook, lighter leader, get the bite. Now I'm going to get to the key way that I fish for kingies personally most of the time. And I do it by slow trolling. And by slow trolling, I mean just having my boat in gear. So I'm traveling at 500-600 RPM, just chugging along, maybe a couple of knots, okay? And I will just have my leader, no floats or anything, and I'll drop the live bait back, probably 15 meters tops, okay? And I will fish out of gear with my clicker on, standing there. The angler, because we're usually the two of us on the boat or three of us on the boat, the angler will hold the rod, feeling the fish swimming. And a good live bait like a kahawai or a decent sized jack mackerel will swim at the back of the boat and you'll feel them jiggling. And then what I do is, using my track, I isolate that area that I'm going to fish, that piece of reef, that structure, the area where there's bait fish, and I'll start trolling that bait there. And they'll swim down. And if you let them out too far, a kahawai will swim to the bottom. So you've got to hold on to them. And sometimes they pull pretty hard. If you've got a 2 kilo kahawai swimming around, it'll pull pretty hard. What you're looking for is signs of panic. And it's, once you've felt it once, you'll never forget it. The kingy will come around and you'll feel your bait get excited. Sometimes it's a kingy. I've had it happen with shags and sharks as well. So your bait will get excited. Then you'll feel a, and the weight will increase. Now you'll think, oh, the kingy's got it, and a lot of people at that stage will strike. That's the worst thing to do. Because what happens quite often, kingies will come up and they'll whack a bait, they'll hit it with their tail, or they'll hit it, and they don't quite get it. They'll stunning it. And once they've stunned it, they'll go in and they'll get that bait. Generally, if it's a big bait, they want to get it head on. So they flare their gills, and that's when you're feeling the tap, and they'll pick it up and they'll run away, and then they'll stop, and then they'll suck it in and eat it properly. So what you're waiting for is that constant pull when you feel the fish has actually got the bait and it's swimming away from you. And what we do in that situation is we just slowly put our drag forward, take the weight, and let the hook set, because you're using circle hooks generally. So don't strike, just let the weight come onto the rod. And the big trick that we use is we just slowly drive the boat away from any structure or reef. He's taken it, he's taken it. I'm turning the boat out to sea. Right, I'm hooked up. See, no big strikes. Yep. Just take the boat out gently. Keep tight on the line. So that reef that you saw me there in 8 meters, 100 meters away, it's 20 meters. So we just point it out there and we just lead the fish out. Right? And we've just got it in gear. We're not going crazy, not trying to land it. We're just leading it away. And a lot of the time, they will just lead out with you. They'll lead like a dog on a lead. 20 kilo, 30 kilo kingies will do that. Once you get them into an area when you think, right, well, they can't get back to the reef and I'm over a better bottom where I've got a good shot at getting them, then you can start applying the pressure, then they'll wake up and then the fight's on. Okay? To give you an example how effective that is, I've won the New Zealand Big Game Fishing Championships for Kingfish 4 times out of the 5 times I fished for it. Fishing with 3 and 4 kilo monofilament line, catching on average 15 kilo fish. Right? We're pulling them out of 5 to 8 meters of water in that area around Waiheke, and very similar, very reefy, and we're using that technique. The longest fight we've had on one is 3 hours. The shortest is about 15 minutes. So even with light tackle, you can really deal to a kingy if you fish it properly. But using that leading the dog technique is absolutely lethal when you're live baiting. And it's a good way to get those fish away from structure that they can bust you off on. If you're fishing deep with live baits, and by deep I mean over 50 meters, there's two techniques I use. I still employ the trolling technique, but I use a downrigger. And this is the weight that gets my bait down. That's 12 pounds of lead there, okay? And I've got an electric downrigger on my boat. So I connect my line here, connects onto this clip, right? Let it down. So I fish a lot at the hen and chicks and the mocha-hinaus up north. And I'm fishing between 20 and 40 meters of water. I generally set my baits at about 25 meters because the kingies will come up to them happily, and they're in massive bait schools and they're swimming underneath the bait schools. So I set it down there, and you can put it in the rod holder and leave the drag sort of partially set. And what happens is when a kingy comes and takes your bait, snaps off, and you're hooked up to your fish straight away playing it, and you've got no weight on the end of it. So that's one way of doing it. The simpler technique, if you don't have a downrigger, is just to weight your live baits. And by doing that, what we generally use is a shorter trace, maybe meter, swivel, and then we put sinkers, depending on how many you need to get down to where you are, above the trace. There used to be a habit of putting the sinkers right on the hook, right? Which got you down into the bite zone. But what happens if you snapped your line, you left a kingy dragging a hook with two sinkers and a swivel, and he couldn't get it off and probably ended up killing him. So it's better to put your sinkers above. So if he does break you off, the sinker's going to fall off and he's only dragging a trace. Now, kingy will get rid of a hook probably up to a week unless it's really, really deeply embedded. It'll come out, it'll rot out, rust out. So that's how you do it for deep water. Deep water, you've got to let it down over the reef. You're looking at sounder. There's some fish there, right? We'll drift over that area, or we'll put our electric motor on anchor lock and we'll drop it down to there. You drop it down to where they are. Same sort of thing as if you're trolling. You're waiting for that panic. Feel the panic, let them run, whack it into gear. But as I said, when you're static fishing over a reef, you don't have that advantage of being able to drive away so easily, right? So when you hook them, just work them, get them pointing the right direction. Because there's one tip I'll tell you, fish cannot swim backwards. So if you get them pointing the right way, they're going to keep coming. As soon as they get their head down, that's when they run back to the bottom. So that's when you use your technique. So lure fishing for kingies is really, really active. We talked about sitting there waiting for a bite. Lure fishing, you're not sitting there waiting for a bite. You're looking for active fish. You're looking to put your lure in front of a fish. So it's active fishing. If you just want to sit on the boat and relax, don't go lure fishing unless you're going to go trolling. Okay, and we'll talk about trolling because it's very successful as well. This is the Rapala lure that I've had for 20 years. It's called multiple kingies. I've replaced the hooks on it a few times, but it's called multiple kingies and it will still catch kingies today. This is the modern Rapala lure. Has a few advantages over the older ones. Firstly, these are made of wood. This is made of injection molded plastic. So there's no breaking these ones. The other advantage with these is you can get them to, these ones used to swim, you could troll them up to about 7 or 8 knots, right? And they go down maybe 10 feet. The modern Rapala minnow, you can get ones that will swim 5 feet below the surface, 10, 15, 30, even 40 feet below the surface. As long as you rig them properly, they will swim all day long. If you want to go trolling for kingfish, this is the one lure you need. It's that simple. You can get them in different sizes, and I dare say there's a few Bowentown fishermen here. The Bowentown Bar is one of the places that's famous for being a good spot for trolling Rapalas backwards and forwards. And if you go there, and it happens probably starts in about November, I think all the baitfish congregate around just outside the bar. Guys go trolling backwards and forwards with Rapalas and they're rewarded with nice kingies regularly. And it's a pretty simple technique. Interestingly, if you get a deep diving Rapala and you say you get one that goes 20 feet plus and you're fishing maybe 20, 25 feet, 30 feet of water, you'll get a few snapper on it as well. I've had more than a couple of 20-pound snapper on Rapala lures. But big kingies has definitely been the lure for trolling. And I'll show you a little example. That's what they look like in the water. And you can see why a fish can mistake that for something edible. They dive, they wiggle. So that's sending off vibrations, it's got flash, it's got everything you need. If you drag that through a school of baitfish and there's a kingfish there, it's going to attract its attention. Right, now the other plug. Tomorrow they're going to be launching Rapala Crush City soft baits. Now, soft baiting for kingies is really, really fun. And the nice thing about them is you'll catch them on soft baits this small, and you'll catch them on soft baits this big and even bigger. I fish the Manukau Harbour a lot when I'm in Auckland. We catch heaps of kingies in the Manukau on soft baits. And the reason we catch heaps of kingies, because they're chasing mullet. We don't usually often jag the mullet there, so we cast amongst the mullet with a soft bait, and the kingies come in and nail it. So what sort of gear do you need to target kingies on soft bait gear? Well, you just need standard soft bait tackle, but maybe a slightly on the heavier side. This is actually a lighter rig. I've got 8-pound braid on this, 30-pound leader, and this rig has already caught 3 or 4 kingies up to sort of like 10 kilos easily with a 5-inch soft bait and a 1/2 ounce head. If you play them, set your drag, no problem at all. So do we need another soft bait? Why is soft bait so good? The Crush City soft baits, the new Rapala ones, and Rapala, a well-known lure manufacturer, they're made of super TPE plastic. So they're really durable, right? Not only that, they are salt impregnated. What does that do? Salt and water gives you buoyancy. So it affects, and someone was talking about floating lures, sinking lures, it affects the sink rate of your lure. So if you want to fish this with high finesse, you can put a very light jig head on it and make it slowly sink through the water column. And interestingly, when I'm fishing soft baits, I actually use very, very little rod action. A lot of people think you've got to wind the rod and do all this. The lure does it all. If you cast it out there, this thing's wiggling like crazy, right, when it goes to the bottom. The real trick is to get your head weight right. This one's got a 2-ounce head on it. That's a very heavy soft bait head. That'll get me to the bottom in 100 meters of water if there's not too much wind. Same lure with a 1 ounce will get me to the bottom in 100 meters with no wind. Get me to the bottom with 50 meters pretty quickly, even if there's a little wind. If there's any sort of wind and you can't get your lure to the bottom, put out a sea anchor or use your electric trolling motor. The sea anchor will slow your boat down dramatically. So setting up the jig head is very, very critical that it's the right weight. There's a number of ways to fish soft baits. Catch quite a few out under workups, and when you get under the workups, you start using these bigger lures, right? And you cast them out, cast up current, so the lure's dropping, coming towards you the whole time. If you cast it behind you, right, the way you're going away from, you're always lifting your lure up off the bottom. You cast it to the direction you're going, it's constantly dropping to the bottom as long as you're not winding. So I say you use very little rod action when you're fishing soft baits. So what you're looking for is your line. You follow your line, same as you do when you snapper soft baiting. You're watching your line drop. As soon as it stops the bottom, that's when you start to slow one lift, let it pop, stop. Quite often, as it's dropping, you'll actually see your line shoot away from you. That's when a kingy strikes, hits it. When you bring it towards you, again, just a little pop. You saw what I did there? Let it sink back down. The lure action with a lift like that will lift it up 5 foot off the bottom and make it go very erratic. So I just use a little, keep the line tight, little pop, and number of kingies you get doing that, especially around workup situations, amazing. If you're fishing around marker buoys and structure like that in shallow water, you want to go much lighter heads, so maybe ½ ounce, ¾ ounce. Cast in, and then you can use a retrieve, a winding retrieve, and get the fish to follow it out, like you would with a stick bait or a popper. The area that we do this a lot is when we're fishing the Great Barrier. We fish around the washy rocks. We catch a lot of snapper doing it, but we also catch a lot of kingies doing it. Last one I caught was actually up Cape Carrier when we were testing the crush cities. And you cast into the rocks, pretty much hit the rocks with your lure. So you're in zero depth, and as they fall away, the lure falls down, and you just pop it away, and just pop it away. As it goes deeper and deeper, you get slammed, because all that white water, washy water, the fish see it, and they just come in and grab it. So as long as you're keeping your line in control, controlled depth fishing is what we're talking about, that's when you get the strike. So soft baits are super, super efficient. They're salt impregnated, they've got scent, they've got great action. It's up to you just to put it in the water and work it around fish. That's all you need to do. I will admit, I do add extra scent to many of my lures. This one's aniseed, and aniseed is not illegal in salt water. It's illegal in freshwater. Any scent is illegal in freshwater. So I do add scent to my lures. Whether it's a jig or a soft bait, happy to add scent to it. It enhances it, and it's not cheating. Right, then we get on to probably the most exciting form of kingy fishing, which we're talking about poppers and stick baits, or surface lures, shall we call them. So what's the difference? A popper generally has a cup face in the front of it. They will float or sit upright in the water. When you stab your rod, it creates a splash. Pop, right? So hence popper. A stick bait imitates just a fish sort of swimming or escaping through the water. It doesn't splash, it's got more of a wiggling action, right? When would you use one over the other? There's a couple of scenarios. If you've got fish feeding hard, actively on the surface, you see them breaking the surface, kingies, especially, a popper will probably be your go-to. If you see a school of fish hunting around, cruising, looking for something, a stick bait would probably be better. And the main reason I use stick baits most of the time is that if you're fishing an area of structure or something and you don't want to scare the fish, a popper may scare them because you're splashing over the top. It might attract them sometimes. Sometimes it might scare them. Whereas a stick bait is just swimming through the water. It's less likely to scare them. So I prefer stick baits when I'm just hunting, looking for fish. When the fish are actively feeding, I go for the popper. And they all work, but there's an action involved. If you fish a lot of poppers, is you get some really big cut face ones that make big splashes. You cast one of those for half a day, your arm will be dropping off, right? A stick bait you can work all day because the resistance is a lot less, and you tend to just sway your rod through the water to give it that kicking, swimming motion. So it's, again, a technique thing. Rigging them up. You normally use casting gear on a 7-footish rod. Again, if you don't have a 7-footish rod, your bait caster, your bait runner with some braid on it will put you in the hunt for general purpose fishing gear. This is specialist sort of stick baiting gear. This rod has a super powerful drag. It's got 50-pound braid on it. I've got 80-pound leader. Most guys fish 80 to 100-pound leader, and a Rapala stick bait. When I rigged them, we rigged them with a very, very strong split ring and a very, very strong swivel. The reason for that is we just get our pliers if we want to change lures, and we just take the split ring off to change the lures. A very quick way to do it. Okay, and it avoids getting twisted up in your line because you've got that swivel there. Single hooks versus trebles, they both work. If you're releasing your fish, definitely work with singles. If you just want to catch a fish, trebles are fine, but they will do damage to your fish. And The biggest problem is when you've got a kingy, 15, 20 kilo kingy flapping around, and he's only got one of these in, and the other one's flapping around, it is definitely going to end up in someone's hand or foot at one day. I've done it many a time. Jigging is like vertical trolling. Okay, there are many, many different ways to jig. This is what they would call a mechanical or vertical jig set, right? Very short, powerful rod. This one should have a rating on it for 2 to 350 gram lures. So that's the optimum lure weight to run on it. And it should have a PE rating of something like that on it. It's probably rated to 80 pound line. So this setup is ideal fished with 200, 300 gram jigs, 80 pound line. Mechanical jigging is using this style of jig. Now this one's, that's a 400, probably a little bit heavy for this rod, but tail weighted, plummets to the bottom, right? Lots of flash, it's got a bit of glow on it, and it has an assist hook. Most jigs have an assist hook. Now to understand assist hooks, we go back to how kingies eat a live bait. When they're chasing one of these, they come up to it and they go, that's a live fish, and they flare their gills. So this, being the lightest part, ends up in their mouth, flaring the gills. People go, oh, because in the early days when they first came to New Zealand, it's sort of a Japanese technique. People were rubber banding these down. I don't want it flying around. And that was the opposite way of what it should have been. Because you can imagine a big kingy flaring his gills, sucks it in. Otherwise, how do they know that the hook's there? They bite it there. So that's how they work. You drop this to the bottom. You normally see sign on your sounder. And mechanical jigging, I'm no pro by any stretch of the imagination. As long as you're making the lure move, you're in the hunt, right? But what you're trying to do is a rhythmic up, down, half a turn every time. And you're just getting that lure fluttering like that. And some guys get really good at it, and they can really work those lures well. The guys with the best actions catch the most fish, okay? Some people try and go too fast. Rhythmic will catch you more fish. Having the lure right will catch you more fish. If you want to get down fast with a lighter lure, get a skinnier one, right? Falls faster. And you can wind it in faster. You can do a speed retrieve. So you can actually just crank like hell and you'll catch fish. You can also do your rhythmic hopping. And that's how you mechanical jig. If you want your shoulders later in life, this is probably not the best technique for you because it can be very, very hard on the body. It's nice when the fish are there and you know they're there and you drop down, and basically when your lure hits the zone where you see all that red mass, your lure stops and you wind and you're hooked up. That's the best thing in the world. When you're there for a whole day for one strike, you go, why the hell did I do this? But it's all right. It is hard work, but it can be worthwhile. It usually works best when the fish are actively feeding. So when there's kingies chasing souries and squid and all that sort of stuff, it's the best time to mechanical jig. When they're not actively feeding or they're staying in one area, this is another style of jig which is called a slow pitch jig, right? This lure, very broad-sided as you see. This falls, flutters, does all sorts of things. This will take probably twice the amount of time to get to the bottom than this will, just because of its fluttering action. Fishing it on a rod like that is not ideal. When you're fishing a slow pitch jig, one that's fluttering down like this, you want a more flexible rod and lighter line, because the idea with slow pitch is to put that lure in the feeding zone or in the zone where the fish are and keep it fluttering and annoying the hell out of them till one decides to eat it. So slow pitch fishing is really good when the fish are not so active fishing. It works when they're active fishing, but when they're not so active feeding, slow pitch is very good. It's also a lot kinder to the body. So it's a lot easier to work slow pitch. And it'll work on everything, kingies, snapper, bluefin tuna, the whole deal. But they're much broader, wider jigs. So you've got to look at your jigs. You've got 3 jigs there. You could all say they're similar, but they're all very, very different. And these generally have 2 hooks on them. These generally have singles on them. So we talked slow pitch. Now we're just talking slow jig. This is got to be careful of the phrasing terminology. Now this is a good old slider. This is a Black Magic Sunaku, 200-gram one, quite heavy. I catch lots of kingies on these, quite often when I'm chasing snapper, but I will use them to actually target kingies. And if you drop these, again, over reefs where there's fish, 65, 100 metres, 50 metres, and there's fish hanging there, kingies will eat these like candy. And again, the nice thing is they're really easy to fish. Okay, the technique with these is to drop it down, try and keep it as vertical as possible. Once you're in the Rodney rod holder, it does work well. When you're kingy fishing, it's slightly different, and you'll catch more snapper if you listen to what I'm talking. These, once they're in the strike zone, right, and with my sounder I can see where that lure is. I actually see it going down. And we retrieve these about 1 wind per second up off the bottom till we're maybe wound 10 metres up, and then we drop it down and repeat the process. Very subtle, slow fishing. The tentacles on these and the flash attract the fish, and just that 1 second wind, right, dump, dump, dump. It's very easy. I've had snapper in 50 metres grabbing these at 20 metres. So they're 30 metres off the bottom, following them up. Come onto a lure like this, which is very, very small. But again, I catch a lot of kingies on small jigs. So they call them micro jigs, but it's a misnomer because they're not micro. They're just small. Okay, and these ones, slightly different technique again. Best generally fished on quite a whippy rod with a spinning reel. Drop it down to the bottom, just doop, 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 doop. The rod's bending, bending, flicking, 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 flicking. Again, kingies, snapper, everything go crazy on them. So there's some various styles of jigging. There's one other style of jigging that I use a lot. It's called yo-yo jigging, which is my favorite because all you do is you get about a 60, 70, 80-gram lure, drop it down to the bottom with a nice medium 10-kilo rod with braid, up, down, yo-yoing. And you want a reasonably flappy lure, but one that can get to the bottom and fish jump on them. So there's different styles of jigging for different fishing conditions. It will work in anything from 5 to 10 metres to 450 metres. The deepest I've caught kingies is 220. If you're going to do any of this jigging sort of gear, make sure, as I've said before, your hardware is premium quality. Now, a split ring is not just a split ring. There are split rings that you can pull open. There are split rings that are 220 pound plus breaking strain. Use the good stuff. And make sure on your boat you've got tools that you can open 220 pound split rings with. Otherwise you end up with a lot of broken nails and a lot of frustration. All the tools you need on your boat, knives, all that sort of stuff, very important. Now we come to the best bit, hooking and playing kingfish. Now I've given you a little bit of a heads up about walking them out when you catch them on a live bait. This is one that I caught on the downrigger, and that was trying to run hell for leather back at that spot. I managed to get away. I was by myself, filming a show and driving the boat and doing everything, filming the cameras, doing the whole lot myself. But when you get to the final stages, landing a kingfish, if you don't lose at the beginning, you've played it, you got it to the boat, the last thing you want to do is lose it beside the boat. But unfortunately, that's when a lot get lost. So we've talked about leader a lot. And the reason we talk about leader is because when your leader gets up to your rod tip, and this is one of the fish we caught in the Nationals, we trace our fish. We grab the leader. Under IGF, International Game Fishing Association laws, if you want to weigh a record, if you're leadering a fish, you must leader it below the swivel. So I'm grabbing that trace below the swivel. And what you do as you grab your trace, sometimes it pays to have some gloves, especially if you're going to wrap it around your hand. I don't tend to wrap it around my hand because I want to let it go in a hurry if the fish dives. But you leader your fish and you just pull it towards the boat. Try not to, that one's flipping its tail, but try not to get its head out of the water because that's when they freak out. Just leader it nice and quietly, and again they'll lead right beside you. And get the angler to stand in the middle of the boat. Because the first thing everybody wants to do is look over the side and see how big it is, and everybody runs to one side, fish goes under the boat, round the propeller, and it's gone. Seen it happen a number of times. Get the angler into the middle of the boat, get him to be prepared to back off his drag, let the fish run, walk around the boat quickly if it goes underneath. Got to be prepared. This is when things happen. Okay, we like to leader them in carefully, and you've got to make a judgment call before it gets to the boat. Are we keeping this fish? Are we letting it go? Okay, if we want to keep the fish, have a gaff ready or a big landing net. If you're going to let it go, try and keep it in the water. But make that decision before it gets to this stage. So netting and gaffing. When you get a fish beside the boat, leader man's got it. Sometimes the leader man is the gaff man as well, if he's got the gaff in his hand. Sometimes it's a separate person. So you get the gaff and you put it over the shoulder of the fish, up by his head and his gills, and just lift it up carefully. What you don't do is put it on the inside of the fish and go like this, because what happens, it rolls out, goes under the boat, snaps your line, or it just bounces off the gaff. So you just hook in there. It's going to flap, right? Just hook it up through the gills. Once you've got it in the head, it's not going anywhere, okay? Hook it in the middle of the body, it could rip out. So your leader man's led it up beside the boat, gaff man goes over the shoulder, lifts, and it'll go straight in. Don't whack it, don't lift it from this side, straight over there. It's not a panic thing, it should all be done nice and quietly. If you're netting it, as I said before, fish can't swim backwards. Put the net in front of it, it'll swim into it. Don't put it behind it and try and chase it. Okay, just put the net in it, let the leader man lead it in, swim in, lift the net up, it's caught. You'll need a big net, right? When you're lifting a fish in a net, hold the pole straight. Don't have the net straight out like you would, because they're generally not strong enough to lift a kingfish. So hold it and lift it up by the hoops, lift it into the boat. When you gaff it, you gaffed it, holding it, it's on the gaff, it's not going anywhere. Make sure everyone behind you is clear. Swing it in. If you put it on the deck, it's going to flap like crazy, right? So the best thing to do is actually get someone to throw a wet towel over its eyes, then you put it on the deck, and it will just generally lay there, okay? Then you can deal with it. The best way is either to give it a good whack on the head or icky it, but be careful, these are big fish. You've got a 20-kilo fish flapping around on the deck, they can break a toe pretty easy if they go like that with their tail. But if you do it all smoothly and calmly, and the crew knows what's happening, as you can see here, it's pretty easy. Now this is a young lady who won one of the major prizes in the Tauranga Fish and Chicks competition with a kingy caught in your harbour here on a particularly miserable day. How big was that one, Mark? How big was that one? 14 kilos. Not a bad effort for a young lady. Once you've got your fish, care and preparation. I have two big icy tech bins on my boat, two chili bins. One I fill with frozen water bottles, and I make then I put salt water into that to make a slurry. So when I catch my fish, I put them into that quickly, bleed them, right? Kill them, bleed them, and then once they've all bled out, I put them onto my ice, so my ice is nice and pristine and not covered in blood. My preferred way to cut up a kingy is fillet it like any other fish, okay? But I use every part of it. So I use the wings, I smoke the wings, you got a bit of meat in the cheeks, you can make stock out of the head, as long as you cut the gills out. The gills are the only bit you don't want. The frame, if you cut it in 3 pieces and smoke it, it's the best bar snack you ever get, okay? And the real key when you're cooking kingfish is not to overcook it. It doesn't like being deep fried and dangerous like snapper and things like that. So it prefers lightly being cooked, even seared, to being just slightly raw, okay, seared on the outside. And that's the best eating experience you'll get. It also makes a pretty good curry. So thank you very, very much for your attention. Now, please feel free to come and ask me any questions you like.